Welcome to class. So, I was browsing through r/D&D when I saw a very familiar topic. People asking about the quality of Curse of Strahd. Now, you might be thinking, the quality of Curse of Strahd, what do they mean? Curse of Strahd is amazing. It's famous for being one of the best D&D modules ever released. It was the D&D module used during Dice Camera Action, arguably the first really big actual play on YouTube, held on the official Wizards of the Coast channel, which ended just amazingly, didn't it? It was also the module that I used for my first ever D&D campaign, which also ended amazingly, didn't it? Man, I'm being a jokester here, but the situations are kind of begging the question, is Curse of Strahd really that good? I mean, obviously in Dice Camera Action, and in my case, the problems caused were not caused by Curse of Strahd, but we do hear about a lot of Curse of Strahd related horror stories. This module often does turn to crap, and it leaves many wondering, is it actually that good? Is the D&D community just trapped in some kind of weird shared psychosis where we all psych ourselves out into believing that the vampire book is great? Were we all just in the Twilight obsession back then? What's up with this? So, I don't think that's the case. I think Curse of Strahd is a great book, but I do think it's a different book. It's different from your standard Dungeons & Dragons adventure. That's what makes it so good, but often that's also what makes it kind of hard to run. So I want to be honest about that. I want to talk about my favorite D&D module ever released and talk about why the Curse of Strahd has tainted so many Dungeons & Dragons games. Without further ado, guys, let's get started. Okay, so what's so different about Curse of Strahd? Well, I want you guys to think about your stereotypical Dungeons & Dragons adventure. Not necessarily what you want to run, just what's typical for most groups, especially with new DMs and new players. What's typical? Fun, high fantasy, action, adventure. Something like what we see in the Dungeons & Dragons movie, for example. In fact, I think that movie, of all the things it did a really good job conveying what a D&D adventure is like. Yes, there are heartfelt moments, but for the majority of it, it's just a fun romp with friends. It's not supposed to be taken too seriously. And again, whether or not you enjoy that tone doesn't really matter to me in this specific scenario. What I'm asking about is what most adventures are like and what most groups fall into, and that is it. Curse of Strahd is the antithesis of that. Curse of Strahd is set in a bleak, hopeless world where the foundations of society have crumbled. The master in power is a totalitarian, immortal warlord, a vampire who dominates the land so absolutely that he may as well be a god. Most big bad evil guys are very much capable of quashing the players, at least up until their final confrontation. However, with Curse of Strahd, Strahd is positively encouraged to stomp the player characters in fights early on and throughout the entire campaign. Your party should always feel afraid. They should always feel hopeless. This is what makes Curse of Strahd special. But that's also very different from most D&D games are going to fall into. Dungeon masters who open up Curse of Strahd and aren't ready to buy into the things that make it strong kind of end up with a weird bastardization of the adventure. Curse of Strahd and a happy-go-lucky sunshine and rainbows adventure, it doesn't really work. And that's coming from somebody who does like those happy-go-lucky adventures. I just like them in other settings with books that were made with that in mind. Curse of Strahd was made with grinding up the bones of children to make pies in mind. It's a very different kind of story. On top of that, it's not just on the DM end, it's also on the player end. If you're with players who don't want to take the adventure seriously, it's going to be awkward. Like, I canceled a Curse of Strahd campaign very early in my DMing career. Even back then, when I was an idiot, I knew that, like, a D&D version of a K-pop star would probably not fit into the Curse of Strahd tone, right? That character sounds awesome, don't get me wrong. I'd want to play that character, but does it fit the dark gothic tone? No. And it's not just the characters, it's also the players themselves. Like, are they willing to roleplay with the darker elements of Strahd's adventure. I mean, obviously, it's not like this module bans the possibility of jokes, but if the players aren't willing to take it at least a little bit seriously, it does make things awkward. Okay, so TLDR, Curse of Strahd is a darker module that requires players and the DM to buy into the darker tone. Obviously, you can play a jokey, happy-go-lucky, more traditional D&D tone adventure with Curse of Strahd, but if you do that, you lose out on what makes Curse of Strahd so special. At that point, it may as well not be Curse of Strahd anymore, and you should probably play another module that fits that tone better, that has the same kind of quality. To get everything out of it, you need that tone, and not every group is going to want that. So, okay, the solution is just that we gotta find the right players. We gotta find people who are willing to buy into the horror, willing to take the roleplay at least a little bit seriously, even if they're not doing character voice or something. They're willing to buy into the emotional stakes, and a dungeon master who understands that they are going to be running a darker toned adventure. That's it, right? That's all we need? Well, the thing is, with darker toned adventures, I think those in themselves have 1,000 ways that they could go wrong. So, let's talk about that. Hey, you know what's not cursed? Today's sponsor! This video is sponsored by Magic Spoon, who create delicious cereal that has both that childlike nostalgia and actual health benefits. Look, I have a lot of fond memories of eating cereal as a kid, but I haven't done it in years until Magic Spoon started sponsoring me. It's not just the cereal, too. These snack bars are delicious. I have a tendency to snack whenever I'm DMing or I'm editing, and they are perfect for that, with high protein and no sugar. You don't think that kind of thing matters, but trust me, man, your stomach is gonna thank you. Look, if you don't trust my opinion on Magic Spoon, trust my mother's, because I send all my sponsorship packages to my parents for safekeeping. But you know what she did the moment she received the Magic Spoon box? She ate it! This was all that was left for me to film the ad! Yeah, that's right. Magic Spoon is mom approved. Whether you're getting the cereal or the protein bars, I'm confident that you will find them absolutely delicious. If you're interested, you can head down into the description down below or to the pinned comment where you can use my code or the link so that you can get $5 off your order of Magic Spoon. Thank you so much to Magic Spoon for sponsoring this week's videos. As always, supporting our sponsors does support us. And without further ado, let's get back to the team. Okay, so actually running a dark campaign, it's a hard thing to balance, isn't it? I watched high rollers play Curse of Strahd, and I really liked it for the most part, because, you know, Mark, Mara, Humes, they are a phenomenal dungeon master. But I did sometimes feel a bit of a disconnect. See, often, when we're running darker campaigns, like what Mark Mara was doing with Curse of Strahd, it often just turns into sort of like a death fest. Like, I will always remember in that Curse of Strahd campaign, one of the player characters, Tabaxi, she bit the dust against Strahd, and there was really barely a reaction. It felt like it just happened, and then the characters sort of moved on, and then a new character was brought in to replace her, and then that was it. It felt kind of hollow, and at least as a viewer, I had trouble connecting. I often find it's the same thing when it comes to when I'm actually playing or running D&D campaigns. And the important thing to keep in mind when running any sort of darker toned adventure, something that many DMs forget about, like in that example, it's the cooldown scene. One of the best cooldown scenes of all time is a short one, but it's very effective. In Fellowship of the Ring, you know, the first movie in the Lord of the Rings series, Gandalf, he kicks the bucket. Spoiler, I'm sorry. He falls off a big old cliff after fighting the Balrog. But that's not really the scene I'm talking about. The scene I'm talking about is directly after, when the Fellowship of the Ring meet outside of Moria and everybody is crying and emotional and sad. That is the cooldown scene. It gives our characters a chance to react to what just happened. So when you're running a darker story, bad things, like Gandalf dying, for example, they're going to happen. They're going to happen often. But your players aren't going to give a crap if you don't give them an opportunity to give a crap. Now, this does come back a little bit to that whole players need to be willing to buy into the emotional way of the campaign thing that we mentioned earlier. But assuming that that's the case, if your players are buying in emotionally and you don't give them a chance to actually, like, express that at the table in any way, then there's not really much of a point. I'm not trying to say that you need your player characters to be like crying at the table or anything. Not everyone's going to be acting to that degree. But even small things like, hey, my character reacts to this death or to this event by sharpening his sword so aggressively that the blade breaks. Like, that's a little bit of good character. It doesn't require any intense acting or anything like that, but that description adds so much more weight to what happened. Because if we just move on from all the darkness, it's not really going to have any more impact. That bone grinder with the kids getting turned into pies, like if you just reveal that and then just move on, what is the point? I mean, that's a shocking, visceral, creepy, sad revelation. Give your players a chance to be disgusted by that. Because if you just move right from the reveal of the bone mill grinding up kids into like a fight with some twigs or some hags, then your players are going to forget about their disgust. They're no longer going to have that same emotional weight. We as DMs often really love to fill up space. We're yappers. There's no shame in it. But there are times, and I know this is difficult, you gotta shut up and let your players fill that space. This is especially important when you're running a darker campaign like Curse of Strahd. If you take up talking about all these dark things that are happening around the player characters and not giving them an opportunity to react to it or do anything about it, they're going to grow numb. This also applies with player character death, which is another topic I want to talk about here. A lot of people think that in order to run something like Curse of Strahd or any sort of darker story, you need a constant windmill of characters dying in order to make it feel like that hopeless adventure. And for the record, this is coming from a guy who adores a difficult combat. But even I have to admit that you don't need to do that in order to make your campaign a darker adventure. Death is helpful, but it's not mandatory. Cyberpunk 2077 is a really depressing story, and the vast majority of that game's main cast make it out on the other side of it. The same thing goes for something like Star Wars Andor, which just had its finale recently. I remember on the subreddit, people were all debating about how many characters are going to get killed off. And there were so many predictions that swaths of characters would be killed in the finale, and spoiler alert, there were definitely a lot of deaths in Andor, but it's not like the majority of the cast died. A lot of the main characters actually made it out A-okay, which surprised a lot of people, but I was glad of it. Because yes, a story can be dark, but death isn't the only thing you can do to make that happen. First, there are fates worse than death, and second, you can't have shadow without a little bit of light. If you want to make those endings impactful, having survivors matters just as much. So keep that in mind if you feel like you need to kill off swaths of NPCs or swaths of player characters. If you want to do a challenging campaign, do it for the sake of the challenge. Right? Do it for the sake of wanting to make your player characters build their characters in an intelligent way to make them more powerful. That's why I run hardcore challenging combats. It forces my players to adapt to me. But when I run my hardcore challenging combats, I'm not killing anybody. Like, rest assured, all my player characters with their min-max builds, they're fine. They are perfectly A-okay. I set that challenge for a completely different reason than just a dark narrative, all right? It would feel like cheating if I was just killing them off for the sake of making the story more depressing. But okay, so we've gone over why Curse of Strahd is different from other campaigns. We've gone over how to do that darker tone with a little bit more efficiency, uncovering some of the common mistakes I see. But there's one last thing I really want to bring up, and that is our prime example that we mentioned right at the top, dice camera action. What's funny? Dice camera action kind of proves this entire video sort of irrelevant, because dice camera action is a happy-go-lucky group of complete roleplay novices for the most part. I mean, people who had definitely been on camera before, they had some acting experience, I'm sure, but for the most part, the cast of dice camera action were just normal internet personalities who were not experienced with roleplay. They were playing way more stereotypical fantasy adventure characters, not exactly built for the darker tone of Curse of Strahd. Their party was named the Waffle Crew, for crying out loud. They were clearly not trying to be all emo and depressing. But the Waffle Crew and Dice Camera Action are still remembered as probably the most famous Curse of Strahd campaign to ever happen. Now, obviously, their association with Wizards of the Coast is probably primarily what facilitated that, but I also think it's because a lighthearted Curse of Strahd game can work. Look, is it the maximum capability of what all of Curse of Strahd can be? Probably not. But at the same time, does it have to be? Also, definitely not. If you want to have fun in your D&D game, have fun however you want to. Chris Perkins clearly did not care that these people were running through his dark adventure with more happy-go-lucky characters. And of all the people in this universe, Chris Perkins has more right to give a shit about the tone of Curse of Strahd than any one of us. Okay? Now, my point isn't that DMs need to give up on taking the game seriously. If you want to take the game seriously, find a group to do that. But if that's not really a need for you, don't feel the need to change your style to match Curse of Strahd or go to an entirely different module. Like, generally, yes, I probably recommend that, but is it a necessity? Hell no. Alright, I'm just some asshole YouTuber. I'm doing what I think is best for my games, but that is not always going to be what's best for yours. The Waffle Crew, yes, they ended in tragedy, but I loved their adventures when they were playing Curse of Strahd, despite the fact that it didn't fit into the tone of the game at all, despite the fact that Strahd went down in that campaign like a straight up puppy. Easiest fight I've ever seen in any actual play ever. Very unfortunate and embarrassing for the guy, but it was still really good. So, no matter how you want to play Curse of Strahd, embrace that. Acknowledge the tone of the game, but embrace what makes you a strong game master and a fun table. Aquarium message as always, but hey, we made it to the end. If you guys can't think of a comment and want to let me know you made it to the end of the video, then head down and leave the comment Curse of Strahd so that I know that you stayed all the way through. If you really enjoyed, please do leave a like and subscribe to Crispy's Academy. Oh, and check out this other video where we covered dragons for Dragon Week. Finally, if you want to support our channel and get exclusive homebrew content, you can head over and find Crispy's Tavern on Patreon down in the description. In essence, like, comment, subscribe, support. We will see you all next time. Farewell.